Welcome to Talking Meds on the PrescQIPP podcast, engaging conversations about medicines-related dilemmas. Hello, my name is Jonathan Underhill. Welcome to the latest episode of Talking Meds. I'm delighted to be joined today by Alison Smith. Alison is a registered dietitian and has been for more than 25 years now. Since 2013, she's worked as a prescribing support dietitian within a number of NHS bodies such as clinical commissioning groups and latterly an integrated care board. Currently, Alison works in Hertfordshire and West Essex with my great friend Anurita Rohilla, who is a friend of the podcast and is a fantastic chief pharmacist there. Her work focuses on the appropriate prescribing of nutritional products with a particular remit for prevention, identification and appropriate management of malnutrition using a food-based approach. Her specific interests include the nutritional aspects of conditions such as frailty, sarcopenia, dysphagia, dementia, and end-of-life care. Alison is also the chair of the Department of Health and Social Care Advisory Committee on Borderline Substances, so the ACBS. And she's also chair of the PrescribingSupport Nutrition Virtual Professional Group, which we're going to plug later. Alison's also a committee member of a couple of groups within the British Dietetic Association, the BDA. And in 2021, Alison was proudly made a fellow of the BDA for her services to the profession. Finally, in 2024, she was awarded the inaugural Chief Allied Health Professionals Officers Gold Award for Excellence for some of her work. So Alison is quite the rock star of the dietitian world, and I'm delighted to be joined by her. Alison, how are you doing?
Not too bad. I don't think I've ever been described as a rock star before, but I'll take it. Thank you.
So that sounds, again, you've obviously got a really interesting role here, and that's why I was keen to get you on the podcast. But was there anything I missed there that you wanted to highlight extra?
I think possibly the only other thing that still relates to food is that I support the National Association of Care Catering. I'm one of the judges for their Care Chef of the Year competitions and their other care awards, and have been for, I think about 7 or 8 years, which is an amazing opportunity to taste some fabulous food, because that's why I got into dietetics. I'm really into food, but also to really support chefs who are trying to raise their game and do the best they can using food, not prescribed products.
Fantastic. So I didn't know that. So it's a bit like MasterChef.
It is,
it may
yeah.
be that MasterChef, that the BBC are looking for new MasterChef judges soon, so you never know. You might get a job along those lines.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd be up for that.
So tell us a little bit about your career journey so far, and the reason I'm interested is how on earth did you end up working in the medicines optimization team?
Good question. So I've always been a community dietitian. I've never worked in a hospital, and that was absolutely by design. I have worked as an older person's dietitian for most of my career. So, that must be over 20 years that I've worked as an older person's dietitian. And that involves a lot of working around nutrition support, malnutrition, supporting care homes, supporting people in their own homes. And in the past, obviously, it involved lots of requests to GPs to prescribe product, because that's what lots of us as dietitians do. And then I started to get more involved working nationally, talking with other dietitians working in similar roles, and started to get involved in the, as we sort of became, as prescribing support dietitians came into being, really. And I was sort of on the fringes of that, but quite interested in it, and thought, that's a role I think I would quite like. And I was lucky enough to be successful at interview back in the days when we had 2 CCGs in Buckinghamshire, and I basically got that role. And I kind of got into CCGs, got into the medicines optimization team, and thought, I'm home. This is where I belong. This is where I really want to be, rather than in a dietetic department, which for dietitians listening to this would probably be sort of putting their hands in the air and shouting with horror that I'm not wanting to be in a dietetic department. And that's simply because I think as a dietitian, I can support so many more people than just talking with basically like-minded peers. Is actually if I can support other people to learn what we as dietitians know and can do, I can spread the word wider.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And I remember working and supporting medicines teams who often struggled with things on the ACBS, nutritional products, and some of the other sort of things that are on ACBS. So I would have thought having somebody whose job it is to know about this stuff would be really helpful from a prescribing team perspective. So how many people are there like you across the UK then? Is this something that all medicine teams have, or are you on your own, or what?
It's a really hard question to answer, actually, because nobody actually really knows, because there's no database of all prescribing support dietitians. It certainly isn't a role in every medicines optimization team. So it really depends on whether medicines optimization teams have decided in the past that nutrition is important enough to need somebody who's an expert in it to advise. Different medicines optimization teams have taken different approaches. So some will actually commission services from a provider. Some will have dietitians who actually are part of their team, which is where I fit in. And some will simply look for a bit of guidance every now and then. Sometimes the roles can be quite short term as well, which as someone whose role is not short term, I'm going to say I don't think is the best plan, because I think anything you only do in the short term, you tend only to realise short-term savings, whereas this is a in it for the long haul thing, as far as I'm concerned. And so it's quite hard to say at any one point how many dietitians there are working in medicines optimization. But I would hazard a guess that there's possibly 50-ish, maybe higher than that, maybe lower than that. But dietetics is a small profession, and we're a tiny number of a small profession.
Yeah, again, just that ballpark figure, I think is quite useful for me just to get an idea of that. I think it's a good point that you make as well. I remember when Prescribing was a thing, and on people's Prescribing plans, often nutritional products would creep in there because they're potentially high cost. And there were lots of people employed to do something about that, but only on a specific project basis. As you say, to get that real buy-in and for you to be a integrated and respected and important member of the team, that needs to be on a more longer term basis, doesn't it, rather than just a one-off project. So if there's about 50 of you out there, how do you go about staying in touch? Because I'd imagine, and I don't like to put words in your mouth here, but as a dietitian in a team predominantly of pharmacy professionals, I would think there's a little bit of a risk of professional isolation there, isn't it? So I would have thought it would be important for you to keep in touch with other people like you. So how do you do that?
I would absolutely agree with you. It is quite a risk. And some dietitians in medicines optimization teams can end up feeling incredibly isolated from dietetics. I was lucky when I came into it. I already had some really good networks, both not locally, because I didn't know the area at all when I became prescribing support dietitian, the geographical area, but I had some really good national networks of dietitians working in similar fields. So that helped me at that point when I was a single dietitian working in a medicines optimization team with almost entirely pharmacists. But what we have now is there are more prescribing support dietitians than there were when I became one. But we have a couple of ways of keeping in touch beyond just sort of the knowing people who are also in the same part of the profession. We have a specialist group within the British Dietetic Association, and you mentioned at the beginning that I'm on the committee of two specialist groups, in the British Dietetic Association, and one of them is the Optimising Nutrition Prescribing Specialist Group, which, as hopefully its name suggests, is all about optimising appropriate prescribing of nutritional products. So it's largely a specialist group for prescribing support dietitians. And so that is there to support dietitians working within this field. The other thing that we have, which I'm delighted that I was asked originally to become chair of it, and I still am chair, so I clearly haven't done too bad a job, I hope, is basically the Nutrition Virtual Professional Group within PrescQIPP. And that's another thing and that's not just open to dietitians, and it's not just open to prescribing support dietitians either. It's open to really anybody for whom it's relevant. But it's really something that every quarter we have a fairly short meeting just talking about what is happening in the world of nutrition that relates to prescribing and what you need to know about it sort of on the ground. So we have those two really good networks to basically keep in touch and support each other, basically.
Yeah, I mean, again, really good ideas. We'll put links in the show notes to both of those groups, but just the idea of being able to, we talk about this in Information Mastery, to hot sync your brain with what's new, what's just come out from Department of Health or from NICE or from one of the other Royal Colleges about nutrition. If you can catch up with your peers, with other people in a proactive way, that's a really, really good way of staying up to date, isn't it? So just in terms of the challenges that you have within your profession at the moment, or within your role at the moment, what would you think what would you say the main challenges are for you?
I think working in an integrated care board, anybody else listening to this who works in an integrated care board, the biggest challenge is not knowing whether we're going to have a job. Because
Yes.
obviously since March 2025, we've all been sort of in this bit of a limbo, really, about what's going to happen in the future. And we're several months on from that now and still not that much clearer. So that's quite a challenge, not least because my personal fear, professional fear, is that dietetics will not be necessarily perceived as important within medicines optimization. I'm quite certain medicines optimization will still be seen as important. I flipping hope so anyway. But I'm not sure that a lot of people are going to be particularly aware of the role that prescribing support dietitians play in this, and quite how big a financial challenge there is attached to these nutrition products. Because at the moment, in the last financial year, we spent in England in primary care £603 million on all prescribed nutrition products. And of those, 233 million was spent on just oral nutritional supplements. So those are the sort of the milkshake type drinks that everybody, I suspect, on the call is going to be familiar with. And so this is rising year on year. It's not going down. It's just going up and up and up. And actually, if all of the prescribing support dietitians kind of disappear from the equation in this brave new world that we're all traveling towards, I am afraid of what is going to happen from a budgetary perspective, because it's hard to pull things back once you've opened floodgates. And sort of going back to what you were saying previously about nutrition being seen rather as a sort of a quick project of get in there, sort this out and out again. The reality is, I remember going into my interview for my first prescribing support role and quoting a study that was done back in 2009 that said that short-term posts only realise short-term savings. And the same is just as true in 2025 as it was in 2009. And so even if you get people in to do these short-term projects, they will not realise long-term savings, which is really what we need. And so it's the risk of lack of continuity that concerns me, and the risk of not having the experts in nutrition. Because again, exactly as you say, having people on the ground who understand all of these nutrition products really does make a difference. The pharmacists I work with have learned so much, and I have learned so much from them, but it's a two-way street. It's not something that, I would expect anybody without dietetic knowledge to be able to manage as well without that dietetic leadership behind it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, so there's the financial aspect, but there's also the clinical care aspects of appropriate prescribing of nutritional products as well, isn't there? And again, it strikes me as a classic example of failure demand, where you don't do it properly in the first place, and that you then end up having to do loads more work, maybe 6 months or a year down the line, but it ends up being a lot harder to put it right. Whereas actually a bit of investment up front and a bit of sensible use of professionals like yourself could make such a difference to patient care and indeed to the potential of waste within the oral nutritional
Absolutely.
supplement world as well. So yeah, there's that existential threat, which, as you say, everyone's kind of feeling a little bit of at the moment. But what about some of the other issues? I know we talked about the role of the industry here, And we talk about the role of the pharmaceutical industry with medicines, and there's lots of regulation around what pharmaceutical companies can and can't say. My experience within things like ACBS, including nutritional products, is that those restrictions and constraints tend to be a little bit less than they are with medicines. Would you say that was fair? And how do you go about doing something about the role of and the influence of industry within the nutritional products?
I think they're really good points, and I would completely agree. I think I look on the regulation of medicines with envy, because I would love to see something rather more, what's the word I want? Rather more concrete around the nutrition products. There really is
more robust,
yes,
isn't it?
robust. That's the word I
Exactly.
want. Thank you. Yeah. So when it comes to nutrition products, odd as it sounds, there actually is no regulation of prescribed nutrition products. So the products that are ACBS listed are nutrition. And they are, although ACBS covers some skincare products as well, there's about 10 skincare products, and otherwise everything that's ACBS listed is nutrition, and there's nearly 700 of those. So it's one of these peculiar things. Borderline substances theoretically applies to lots of different things, but really it's pretty much nutrition. And there's no regulation at all. There is no regulator of this. ACBS is often thought of as being the regulator, but we're actually not. We have no regulatory powers at all. And that in itself is quite a concern and a challenge. When it comes to companies, they are not governed by the ABPI in the same way that pharmaceutical companies are. Gosh, I wish they were. And it is interesting to see, the more I have learned, the more cynical I have become. And I was quite cynical about them to begin with. But the companies are very, very good at marketing. That's their absolute key skill, marketing. Market the products and market them to the right people. And so the way that products get into the healthcare system is they come into hospitals through penny pricing, loss leading contracts generally. And I'm talking largely about the oral nutritional supplements here, which kind of leads everything. And then they kind of get stuck in everybody's heads as the desirable product, the gold standard. And this is everybody, and I mean every healthcare professional, but also every relative who visited someone in hospital and every patient who's been given them in hospital. They become stuck as gold standard. And then, of course, when somebody comes out of hospital, they will follow them on their discharge summary with little information often for the GP to understand, why is this even being prescribed? Is it appropriate? Does it meet prescribing guidance? And actually, you've already sold it to people as this is the thing you need. And the reality is, all nutritional supplements contain nothing that food doesn't. And actually, you could do everything that ONS do with food. And that's the approach that I take within the medicines optimization team I'm in. This is not to say that there aren't some nutrition products that aren't necessary, because obviously there are lots of other things beyond all nutritional supplements. The reason I always focus on those is because that's where a big chunk of the money goes. And they, as I say, contain nothing that food doesn't. Products that are for people with inherited metabolic disorders, for example, completely different, absolutely necessary. People genuinely can't live without them. But there are a lot of other things that you kind of go, actually, how much of these is really appropriate? But as I say, my focus is always going to be on all nutritional supplements, because that's where 40% of the spend on nutrition borderline substances goes. And there's nothing in them you can't get in food. So that very much is my focus there.
Yeah, no, quite rightly so. I can completely see that. And again, nobody's going to argue if somebody's got a particular metabolic condition and they need a particular supplement.
Absolutely.
So the role of the ACBS then is quite an interesting one, isn't it? And as you say, I mean, the clue's in the title. It's an advisory committee. It has no legal basis or anything like that. It's an advisory committee. So the ACBS, and this is where we first came across each other, Alison, wasn't it? Where when I was at NICE, I was managing the contract for the provision of the BNF to the NHS, and you were chair of the ACBS, and we worked together to try and make the BNF reflect what was in the ACBS, and making that clear. If the ACBS have considered the evidence for a particular substance, borderline substance, then that should be included in the BNF within that list and within those monographs?
So it was slightly different route, but same endpoint. So it was
Yeah.
actually through ACBS, I ended up working with the NHS Business Services Authority to support them to recategorize every single nutrition product that appears on EPACT 2. So if you have any familiarity with EPACT 2 and you've ever looked at nutrition prior to January 2023, it will have been a living nightmare for you, I can guarantee, because it was for me for all of those years. But since January 2023, every nutrition product has been categorized into something that actually makes sense. So all products that are essentially the same thing, just made by different manufacturers, are all grouped together in a similar way to how you would actually see medications grouped together. So we've gone down the route of this is what they are and how they're used, as opposed to this is the disease for which they are used, because that doesn't really apply in quite the same way to nutrition products. And through doing that exercise, which is an enormous piece of work, and I take my hat off to NHS BSA for their support of it, it was amazing. We then said to BNF, well, actually, you need to follow suit. You need to use the same categorization because we need consistency here. We need everybody to be doing the same thing. And that was where we met, where we were basically wanting to support BNF to effectively change the way they categorize nutrition products to the same as NHS Business Services Authority, so that everyone's consistent and it makes sense for everyone across the board. That has now happened, which is fantastic. As with everything, there were tweaks around the edges, and BNF were tremendously helpful in pointing out tweaks that needed happening. But when you bear in mind that there are 700 products, which might not sound that much, but actually when they're broken down to all the different flavors, it was thousands of lines of data. And so there were a few that slipped through the net, for which I will absolutely hold my hands up and say, yep, there are things I missed, but it really helped having BNF support to pick up some things, which helped us to tighten it up. That went back to NHS BSA. So we managed to complete the loop. So we're still working on that. And that is now what we're looking at. Whenever anything comes to ACBS, we're actually able to use the categorization to look at and how does this fit into the product categories currently in BNF. And that's been tremendously useful because we never had that ability to do that with products coming into ACBS before, which meant that it was much harder to push back in some places with products that you sort of think, well, actually, there's no real need for this, or this is a brand new type of product. It's not just the same as some things that's already produced.
Yeah. So like all things in the NHS or indeed in life, it's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it used to be. And having that sort of proactive collaboration between ACBS and BNF, so there's at least an agreement around categorization and presentation of information, is really, really helpful.
Yeah, it was amazing joint working.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess for the future, what would you, if you had not quite a magic wand, but if you had carte blanche to do something around in this area, what would it be?
One of my plans of before I can no longer be chair of ACBS, because obviously, as with all things must come to an end, and it can't be sort of an open thing for me to do forever. But one of the things I am determined to do before I step down is to look at the way that the products are, the indications, because we've talked about categorization, but there are also ACBS indications. And at the moment, they just don't make any sense. They're very historical. A lot of them have been in place for a very long time. They're all set by the manufacturers of the products. They're not something that ACBS decides. And some of them just don't make any sense at all. And so I am absolutely determined to basically rework the indications for ACBS products, nutrition products, to make them simple, consistent, easy to understand, and more importantly, easier to evidence. Because whenever anybody's prescribing a product that is ACBS listed, they should be able to evidence why that patient meets ACBS criteria. And at the moment, they very frequently cannot do that because the indications are so woolly or so odd. So I'm absolutely determined on that.
Yeah, I mean that was the thing when I've looked at this. It's that, so what's the evidence for this particular product or this particular group of products? And you just and it's as you say, it's very, very difficult to find the evidence. There isn't even any consistency around what the indication is. So you can't even begin to start generating or compiling the evidence for something if you don't have agreement on what the indication's for. So that sounds to me like a really good starting point. It's a bit like planting an oak tree, isn't it? The best time to plant an oak tree was 200 years ago. The second best time to plant an oak tree is today. So let's plant that oak tree and get that those indications sorted there as well. So Alison, this has been a fantastic conversation. Just to finish off, then we'd like to do the kind of what three things as part of the podcast. So for pharmacy professions and professionals and teams listening to this, what do you think the three things that pharmacy teams should be thinking about with respect to the sensible prescribing of nutritional products?
Okay, so I think the first thing to say is, because they are ACBS listed, they are effectively, you need to think of them as drugs.
Yeah.
That is how they need to be thought about. And so all the same things that as a pharmacist you would apply your mindset and your training and your knowledge to a drug and appropriate prescribing is exactly the same things that you should be applying to prescribing of nutrition products. There's no difference. And that means nutrition products aren't just food, and they are not harmless. This is something I frequently come across from sort of pharmacists, I have to admit, not in my team because they're all fabulous, but elsewhere, of pharmacists saying, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? They're quite harmless. If people, if I prescribe them, and it's prescribers as well, not just pharmacists, it doesn't really matter. They don't do any harm. And I would say, no, they actually can do quite a lot of harm. Often it's the harm of omission. It's the harm of people just not realizing. It's the harm of people thinking, oh, this product is there, therefore I don't need to worry about this person's nutrition. We see that an awful lot. So they are not harmless. They are not just food. The issues that you mentioned before about wastage are phenomenal. And that in itself means they're not harmless to the environment and from a sustainability perspective. And the thing is, you need to be thinking about the problems with them in the same way as with drugs. We know that there's lots of issues around appropriate prescribing. Lookalike, sound-alike errors are phenomenally prevalent when it comes to nutrition products. But again, they tend not to be picked up because you can't report them on the yellow card scheme. You can't report anything like this in any way that you would report it with drugs, which makes it really hard to get on top of where all of the errors are happening. And the errors can cause quite significant health problems too. We know of examples of children being given the wrong inherited metabolic product, and that it causing such harm that the child ended up in ITU. And that was a lookalike, sound-alike error. And it wasn't just one, there have been multiple ones like that. And so I think it's really I come back to what I started with, which is think of nutrition products in the same way you think of medications. And if you think we still need to have medicines optimization teams, pharmacists looking at this, well, in the same way, you still need to be thinking about nutrition products. And that means you're still going to need support from prescribing support dietitians in the future, basically to enable us to keep on top of this growing spend of some things that are really appropriate, but some things that probably aren't.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. I think that it's a really good idea to think about these. These are prescribable items. And as you say, I'm not sure they're given the priority that they potentially should have within prescribing teams, other than when it appears on your budget line, because it's a high cost area, unfortunately. But as you say, there are clinical consequences to poor prescribing of nutritional products as well, aren't there? Absolutely. Alison, that's been really, really interesting talking to you. As I said, I will put some links in the show notes to how people can stay in touch with each other. Whether you're a dietitian yourself working within, outside of prescribing teams, or you're working in a prescribing team and you want to keep up to date with what the challenges and the issues are around nutritional support, join the PrescQIPP VPG. And get that, as I say, that updates every so often with what's happening there, and you get to listen to really smart, intelligent people like Alison who live and breathe this sort of thing on a daily basis to try and help the rest of us stay up to date with the important stuff. So thanks again, Alison, and we'll see you all again soon. Bye.